we go. We can edit it later. Sound good?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Mindy Wilson. I'm in the Center for Career and Professional Development. Today, we are doing a mini career chat on the wide field of chemistry. And we have 3 alumni to talk to us today about their jobs and how they got to where they are at. We have Joshua Abbott, an 06 grad. He is a senior scientist at Axalta Coding Systems. We have Jasmin Kaeser, a 2011 grad. She's a criminalist in the San Diego Police Department Crime Lab. And Gregory Smith, who's a 95 grad. He is the Otto N. Frenzel III Senior Conservation Scientist at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields. I will let Joshua get us started.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so I graduated in the class of 2006 from Center. After graduating with a degree in chemistry, I then moved on to the University of Tennessee for my PhD work. There, I worked in inorganic chemistry, particularly looking at heterogeneous catalysis. So these are catalyst systems often used in industrial applications, often in petrochemicals and things along those lines. So I was there until 2012. Then I continued on with a short postdoc at UT before I found my first job, which was outside of Boston for a small company called Xtalic. It was originally a startup company founded out of MIT. It was focused on metal coatings. And so there I worked on aluminum alloy coatings for corrosion prevention. The interesting aspect of these is that we were coating them out of systems called ionic liquids. And the particular systems we were working with are very air and moisture sensitive. So a lot of work in glove boxes and air sensitive environments. I worked for Xtalic as a chemist for 4 years, and then as a senior scientist for another 2. And then about 1.5 years ago, I moved to a senior scientist position with Axalta in Mount Clemens, Michigan, which is outside of Detroit. And Axalta works primarily in organic coatings for the automotive and industrial sectors, right? So there, I work in a group called Electrocoat, which is primarily focused on the primary corrosion barrier layer on automotive vehicles. So there we're again applying an organic coating directly to the metal of the car bodies. And so as a senior scientist there, I'm working with customers doing product development, R&D, a variety of different jobs. So that's general background on how I got to where I am today. All right.
I think I'm next. So I'm Jasmine Kaser. I work in the crime lab for San Diego Police Department. I'm a biologist, so sorry. I obviously do work with chemists, but yeah, I graduated from Center with a degree in biology. I knew I wanted to do forensics when I started at Center, but obviously there's not a forensics program there. And I decided before graduation, I was like, well, I know all of the science, but I don't actually know what would happen in a forensics lab. I don't know what technology I'd be using. I don't know what the day-to-day looks like. So I decided to go get my master's degree in forensic science. So I ended up at Boston University School of Medicine, where they have a great forensics program. Did my thesis there, got a lot of hands-on experience doing that, learned all of the different equipment that I needed to be able to use, which then got me a job out here in San Diego. Forensics is really competitive right now because we're all the CSI generation. We all grew up watching all those crime shows, and there's a lot of people who are interested in the field right now. So the master's did really help set me apart from a lot of other people who are applying for the same job that I was. I was told that I was one of 200 applicants for my position. So some of that may have just been San Diego's pretty cool and lots of people want to live out here. And some of it is just that a lot of people think the job sounds really exciting. So I have now been working here at SDPD for about 7 years. It takes a little while for you to go from being hired to actually doing the work, because obviously working in forensic science, there's not a whole lot of room for error. You need to be able to do every step the same way every single time. You need to watch out for bias. You need to be able to explain difficult scientific concepts to a jury full of lay people who don't understand what you do or think they understand what you do based on what they saw on TV, which is not often how it actually works in real life. So it took about 2 years after getting hired for me to fully complete my training and get signed off as a DNA analyst. So I am now doing all case types, so everything from burglaries to homicides to sexual assaults and child abuse cases. Obviously, things are a little different in 2020. I haven't done nearly as much testifying this year because the courts have been shut down, but there's still crime happening. So I've still been going in every day and trying to help solve crime. Our laboratory has obviously multiple sections, including forensic chemistry, DNA analysis, fingerprinting, firearms. We also now have a forensic technology unit for downloading phones and laptops and other kinds of digital information. We have a trace analysis unit, which kind of does some of the stuff you think of more with CSI, like tire treads and hairs and things like that, sort of all of the extra pieces. So they do a lot more chemistry work than I do. But we all kind of work as a team together. We have our crime scene specialists, and then we are all expected also to go out to crime scenes for bullet trajectory analysis and for blood stain pattern analysis. So that has been really interesting during a pandemic too, trying to go out into the field. And the cops are not necessarily as good with their masks and gloves and clean technique as we are. So 2020 has definitely been an interesting year for the crime lab, but I'm still enjoying the work, and I'm always happy to answer any questions that center kids have about the field, since I know there is a lot out there as far as the mystique of forensic science, and it's a little bit different on the ground. I obviously do not wear fancy white suits to my crime scenes. I don't wear them in the lab. I don't even really wear them into court. But it's a really fun field. I really enjoy it. It's a little bit different than research science is, and I find it to be really rewarding because at the end of the day, when I write my report and hand it to somebody, I know that it's going to have an effect on someone's life, and it might change the trajectory of a court case depending on what I find in my analysis. So I really enjoy the work.
Hi, my name's Greg Smith. I'm the senior scientist here at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and I work in this sort of niche area of chemistry called cultural heritage chemistry, which really spans the interface between the arts and the sciences, but also touches on some of those allied fields like forensic science or archaeometry. So I went to Centre College in 1991, largely drawn by the idea of a liberal arts education. I had a lot of disparate interests as a high school student, and so I thought that suited me well. But I was pretty sure that I wanted to be a chemist when I went to Centre. Because of the general education requirements, I was dropped into cultural anthropology with Phyllis Passarillo the first semester of my freshman year. And probably at the time, I didn't even know what anthropology meant. But 2 weeks into that course, I was hooked, and I knew that going forward, whatever I did was going to have to involve chemistry and culture. So at that time, it was really hard to figure out how you would marry these two disparate interests. Fortunately, some of the faculty in the chemistry department were able to provide me some of the relatively limited literature out there on people that were trained as chemists but worked on artwork. And that slowly started leading me down this path. Largely, initially, I pursued the two independently. So I got my undergraduate degrees in chemistry, anthropology, and sociology. I went on to graduate school at Duke University, largely because in the anthropology field, I was interested in archaeology. So I went to Duke to do a chemistry PhD, but I knew that they had two excavations that were going on in Israel. So this was part also of Center's excavation. So they excavated with Duke. And I was lucky enough to be able to spend 9 months of the academic year doing my dissertation research, which was actually on solar energy conversion compounds, so things that would be used for solar energy. But then during the summer, I was able to go to Israel and work as a supervisor on these two excavations. So it was at that point that I started to realize there was a way that I could use my chemistry to look at cultural materials went through a series of postdocs. I was at the British Library on a Sherfield postdoctoral fellowship looking at Gutenberg Bibles. I went to a particle accelerator in Long Island. I spent some time at the National Gallery of Art looking at modern artist materials, and then eventually landed a job as a professor at the State University of New York in one of the programs that train art conservators. And it was at that point that I switched my interests in ancient materials more to the fine arts, and in particular in modern materials. Spent quite a while, 5 or 6 years at Buffalo in the art conservation training program, when the opportunity for a position setting up a laboratory here in Indianapolis. So we were lucky enough to get a large grant, about $3 million, to build the first science laboratory at this museum and work directly with a collection. So what I do here is I run an analytical chemistry facility that is charged with authenticating, studying, and preserving the museum's collection. And what I really love about this particular job is that it forces you to be a lifelong learner and a jack of all trades. So we are an encyclopedic collection, which means we have everything, all different types of artwork from different cultures, from different time periods, and we're working in all of those different materials. So we often joke that, it can be Dutch old masters or digital prints, it can be Neolithic pots, or it could be neon sculptures. And so all of that could potentially end up in my laboratory. And similarly, because of this diversity of materials and artwork, we employ a wide range of analytical tools. So I'm a chromatographer, I'm an electron microscopist, a spectroscopist. We're doing all of these different types of analysis. So I think that gives you just a general idea about this very small area of chemistry.
Thanks, everyone. So what, if you could give one piece of advice to students who are considering your field or an adjacent field, some of you are in very specific fields, what would you tell a student to get into that field?
Well, I can say for forensics, I know that there are a lot of criminalistics degrees and things like that out there. To be a forensic scientist, first you need to be a scientist. So you do need to have some sort of bachelor's in biology, chemistry, physics. Computer science is starting to become more of a thing with cell phones and digital technology, but still you want to have the science background before you start trying to get into that niche of forensic science. I think with Center, I had a really great background in solid biology before I got started down the road of forensics, which really helped me out. And then also for my field, I did a lot of theater at Center, which has really helped me out with being able to testify in front of a jury. So that's the sort of liberal arts addition that made my life a whole lot easier without me realizing it, is that I'm not afraid to stand in front of a crowd of people and explain something to them, because I've done a lot weirder things in front of a crowd for doing Midsummer Night's Dream or some of the other shows that we put on at Center while I was there. So those things that you maybe won't think about where you're like, oh, well, I'm a scientist, so I need to really focus in on that. Some of those liberal arts aspects do really help out too, depending on where you want to end up with your career in the end.
Yeah, so I would say, you don't necessarily have to be worried about kind of pigeonholing yourself or getting too specific with what you end up studying if you go for like an advanced degree. I mean, I did my PhD in inorganic chemistry, and now I'm doing some pure organic chemistry. And in between, I was doing some adjacent material science, right? So I think, continued education is all about the learning process and learning how to pick up new techniques, new, tools, and really how to learn and continue learning throughout your career, right? So that you can transfer the knowledge you pick up to some new topic or new subject when the opportunities present themselves.
And I think for my field, because it is a very small field, and at the time I had trouble even finding out about this field, there are no academic programs that train in America, at least in cultural heritage chemistry. So it took a lot of perseverance and trust that things were going to work out, and that even if you think more broadly to the field of art conservation as well as conservation science, if this is something that you can't imagine not doing in your life, you'll find a way to make it happen. So persevering and taking advantage of every opportunity that comes your way.
Thank you. So this is my favorite question to ask alumni when they come back to talk. And Jasmine, I think you might have hit on a little bit on this, but I want to give everybody the chance to think about it and answer. What is one thing that you would not have given up as a center student? Like one thing that you have taken with you and that is important to you now. And then maybe one thing that either you regret not doing or that you shouldn't have done as a student. We need parameters on that, right? I don't need to know your flame stories.
Well, I can say one thing that I took with me was the mentoring that I got as a student in the chemistry department at Center. As I mentioned, I became a professor for a time myself, and even now that I'm not in an academic program, that because I benefited so much from having faculty members who were invested in my success, I've tried to take what I learned from them and then use that with the undergraduates that I work with through collaborations we have. And still also, maintaining a link to Center. We were talking earlier about Dr. Feeberg in the chemistry department, who still comes up to our lab and works with us in a collaborative fashion. So I can definitely say that's one of the best things about my education at Center was all the attention I got from faculty.
You don't want to share your regret?
I'm thinking.
No.
I mean, on that front, I would say, the thing that really got me started off on the right track at Center that I'm really appreciative of was the opportunity to do research over the summers. So, after my sophomore year, I did some research with Dr. Preston Miles. And then, partly because of that opportunity, the following year, I ended up doing undergraduate research out at the University of Montana. So those kind of introductory opportunities to research really solidified that was a path forward I wanted to take, and help me understand where I wanted to go from Center. From a regret perspective, I think it's really, I wish I had taken a few more math and statistics classes. I think, data analysis and even, computer science type things, I think in industry and research in general, it's such a big part of things moving forward and ongoing now. So that's stuff I've had to learn later, but which I'd taken an opportunity to take advantage of while I was at Center.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people don't realize when they start at Center is how big the Center Mafia is, how many people are out there who are alums or who are affiliated in some way with Center that are willing to help you out. So for example, my senior year, I got to do an internship at the medical examiner's office in Louisville. And that was huge for me and really helped solidify that this is what I want to do for a living, because no one knows how they're gonna react to seeing a dead person for the first time. Like that's not something you just kind of run into in your everyday life. So for me, getting to work at the medical examiner's office, being like, oh, I'm okay with this. Like I can deal with this. This is my personality will gel with this. And I can still go to crime scenes and I can handle scary evidence and things like that. Now that I kind of know that about myself, I felt much better about going off to grad school for forensic science, because I at least had the idea that like, I know I can handle it. I know that I can do this work, and I might not know how to do it yet, but I can feel confident now knowing that I'm ready for it. The only regret that I have is taking accelerated Gen Chem. Taking 2 semesters of Gen Chem at the same time was terrible. But that's what I had to do in order to be able to study abroad. So worth it in the end, but ouch.
And I would add what Jasmine just said is kind of a second thing. I did 2 semesters of study abroad, which at the time was not common for science majors to study abroad, but I would say that has had such a dramatic impact on my career and my life in general. So definitely the opportunity to take advantage of all of the many programs that Center has now to study abroad. I mean, that's formative.
Thanks. And I think things have changed pretty dramatically. The science students have a lot more opportunities to go abroad and even continue with their studies in some places. So that's really great. I guess, Greg, we won't delve into your secret regrets at Center. So maybe we have like 8 or 9 minutes left. I'm curious about what you like most about your position or the field that you're in, and maybe one of the things that's the most challenging about the field or position you're in.
All right, I can go first here. So the thing I find most interesting now is taking materials or material development and seeing them go directly from the lab onto something that's out in the world that you can see every day, right? So, I mean, we all or almost all have automobiles, and you know, it's great to see work that you do in the lab that goes into production and then gets put on a car that you see on the road every day. It's in your driveway, right? So, you know, the lab to real world experience is kind of what I love about my job right now.
What about a challenge in your field?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the challenge in the automotive industry, right, is that cost is everything, right? So you're trying to improve products, but maintain a low cost material, right? So it's always a challenge. You can solve a problem with chemistry and do all sorts of novel and unique things, but a lot of times that comes at a great expense, and when your customers aren't willing to pay that, then you haven't really solved the problem for them. So.
Yeah, I think my answer is somewhat similar as far as the things that I love about my job. Doing research can sometimes be really hard because you're working towards a solution to a problem, and maybe you're only one tiny fraction of the answer to it, or maybe you're at the very base level of the problem. And so there's a long way for you to wait until there is something in the real world that expresses what you've done in your career. And with forensics, every day is different, but every day I have the chance to solve a problem. And I use the same tools, I use the same knowledge every single time. My day in the lab is often very similar to the day before or the week before, but every case comes with its new wrinkle. Every case comes with some different twist on it, or even the cases that are sort of standard. It's like, sometimes it's nice to take a break and be like, oh, look, here's 5 cases that I know how to do that are very easy, as compared to like the big gnarly homicide where there's all sorts of blood stains and I have to keep track of which gun was where. Is this taken off the suspect? Was this found at the crime scene, or is this from the victim? And having to keep all of those moving parts separate from each other. So it is a challenge every single day, and you have to bring your A game because what we do matters. And then the flip side of that is that it's sometimes hard when everything matters. You can't really have an off day. And we deal very closely with police and DAs and trying to maintain your integrity as a scientist, where if the cops want a certain answer for something, it's like, well, no, I'm not going to give you that answer. I'm going to tell you what the evidence says. And the lawyer sometimes will try and say like, oh, well, can you just say this on the stand? It's like, well, no, I can't say that on the stand because that's not what the science says. That's conjecture. And so trying to weave that thin line between what everyone else who's involved in these cases wants out of you, and making sure that you are staying true to what you know is the right thing to do, what is scientifically accurate, and what you can really back up in court, and not letting yourself stray from that path.
And I think I earlier mentioned that one of the things I really love about my job is the diversity, both in terms of the science as well as the subjects that come through the doorway. And that's certainly true. There's no standard operating procedure. Every sample that comes through the door seems to take us in slightly different directions. And that's really, interesting and rewarding. I love the personal touch of all this, that ultimately these objects were created by people. Some of them, were going to be long since gone from this earth. And when you're peering down the microscope at the brushstrokes of a Van Gogh or something like that, you can't help but have the hair on the back of your neck stand up just thinking, about this great artist, and you're looking at one of his creations at this level of detail. On the flip side, one of the hard parts of the job is knowing when to quit, because all of these objects are so complex. We could take any one of our paintings or sculptures and spend an entire career delving into its chemistry and its history and its story or authenticity or whatever. So we have this saying for art conservators that better is the enemy of good. And it's true also in science that at some point you have to set the object aside and say, well, we solved this little mystery about that object, and the rest of it's going to have to wait for another scientist another time.
Great, thank you. I think we are about the end of our time. I wanted to give you a chance, or all a chance, to give one last piece of parting advice or anything else you'd like to close with before we sign off.
I can start. We're often taught from the time we're children that the arts and the sciences are two disparate worldviews. Hopefully an example of the fact that there's this rich interface that joins the two together, and it can be a delightful place to spend a career.
Yeah, I would say just ask. If you don't know, if you have general ideas of like kind of what you want to do with your life, and you have interests and hobbies, but you're not really sure how to marry them together, there's so many different fields out there. Like Greg was saying, I mean, there's that you don't think about, or that are these niche fields. I feel like forensic science kind of has some of those aspects to it, where it's gotten popular because it's more in the media these days. But the boots on the ground version of it really is, to me, a marriage of art and science as well. That I'm in some ways on a stage when I am doing jury trials, and I have to be able to explain what I'm talking about, these very difficult scientific concepts, to people who don't understand that, and I need to make sure that I'm clear, concise, and understood. And that isn't necessarily what people think of when they think of a scientist, is someone who can explain those difficult concepts. So, there are all sorts of ways to marry your different liberal arts interests together in a way that can give you a really fulfilling career. And just because it's not something that jumps out at you as an obvious marriage of these two things, there is probably something out there. And hopefully there's somebody at Center who's connected or knows something about it and can help you move in that direction. I know Dr. Christine Barton, I know she's retired now from Center, but she was a huge help to me, where she's like, I've never had a student who was interested in forensic science, but let me make some calls and ask around and see what we can figure out for you. And she really helped me figure out that grad school was probably the next best step for me, and supported me in that. So there might be something out there for you. You just might need to ask and dig a little deeper if it's something that's not as mainstream as something like forensic science.
Yeah, and lastly, I would say again, don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone, explore something new that you might not have thought of initially. Skills translate, from science to a lot of different areas. And just because you hadn't thought of something before doesn't mean that you can't do it or learn how to do it. So yeah, if an opportunity presents itself and you think it might be a little too far away from your skill set, don't just toss it out. You may be able to learn how to do it and, learn something new and find something very enjoyable.
Well, thank you everybody for your time today. We really appreciate it. In the olden days, we clapped, but I guess we have our little reaction claps. So I'll give you a little reaction clap. But thank you. We really do appreciate you spending time with us today and talking to us about your careers. I'd really encourage, if you all are not in our Career Mentor Network, to join that, because I think that your approaches to science especially are very, very different and varied, and and the students having somebody to talk to would be really great. I am going to put the, hold on, I lost my chat box. I'm going to put the link to the Career Mentor Network into the chat box. And you can create an account there and choose kind of what you're willing to offer to students. But that's where we send students first when they come asking if they can start a network or talk to somebody in a certain field. So we'd love for you to join if you're not there already. And if it's okay with you all, we will, I'll give your email addresses to anybody who views this later and who might want to get in touch, if that's okay. Okay, well, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop.